Alright, so this time we're going to actually use Internet Explorer on Windows 7 so we can see our actual attack. Some of our browsers, particularly our Iceweasel on Kali, have some filtering in place that can be kind of annoying if we're trying to do pen testing, but of course we'd want our browsers, particularly for the end user, to have any checks and filters in place that it possibly could to keep protections in place. But when we actually want to see what is the worst case scenario, what's possible for an attacker, we would want to turn those off. So I actually have turned that off on Internet Explorer. I turned off protected mode. So I look at the security settings. I just went to custom level, and down here at the bottom I made sure the S or XSS or for cross-site scripting filter is disabled. So that's what we're going to do here, is cross-site scripting, probably the most common and also most undervalued bug in web security. There's lots of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and fortunately a lot of times I'm not taken too seriously. We can just go to localhost here, because it's actually hosted on this system. So what we want to do here is actually look at this search functionality. There's two kinds of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, stored and reflected. The one we're going to look at here is actually reflected. If you play with some other bad applications that have vulnerabilities, I mentioned some like a damn vulnerable web application, or OWASP's WebGoat, they would have some stored cross-site scripting as well. And stored cross-site scripting will actually, as the name implies, be stored on the server, and anyone who browses to the page where that stored cross-site scripting attack is will have their browser attacked. Things like forum posts where you can comment, anywhere where you can comment that doesn't do a good job of filtering out malicious content is a good place to find those. But what we have here is something called the reflected cross-site scripting. So it's actually going to be part of the URL. So what I want to do is, in this search function, I want to do script with tags, and then we say alert. And you can put whatever text you want in there. It's just the text it's going to say, and then in script, go ahead and copy this in case I got it wrong. Go. And then we get a pop-up that says whatever our text is. And you can see it's actually here in the URL as well. So basically what's happening here is the way this search is set up, it says no book found for Word or no book found for our script. So it basically repeats back to us what we said. So that allows us, again, since we haven't done proper filtering, to use JavaScript and actually execute it in the context of our user's browser. So like all of our security vulnerabilities that we've seen for our web apps, it's all been about improper filtering of data, making sure what the user puts in is correct. We saw our injection where we added an extra SQL or XML, and we got to do other things on our behalf. And then with this, we see that we also are able to feed it code, in this case, that executes in our browser. So putting up an alert box that says like some words isn't too terribly exciting. Typically what people do next is put in like document.cookie, but this one doesn't actually have any, so it comes up blank. If you can get people's cookies, you can send them off-site. You can even like set up like what looks like a login form in a iframe. It's all really interesting, the kind of things you can do. There's also, you can look at something called the Browser Exploitation Framework, or BEEF, and it like has a lot of functionality built in where if you hook it up to a cross-site scripting vulnerability, it'll give you lots of buttons you can click to do different things to browsers that have been hooked by it. So there's also another form of web application vulnerability that we're not going to see an example of here, called cross-site request forgery. So we think of cross-site scripting as we're attacking the browser. We're taking the browser believes what the web server sends us to be good. It just accepts it and renders it. Cross-site request forgery is basically the opposite. It's the server trusts our browser. If we have an active session, we have a cookie, we've logged in, it hasn't timed out, we have an active session, then the server, if it receives requests that are valid from our browser while we have an active session, the server accepts those as fact and acts upon them. So the typical example for that is like a bank account. We're logged in at our bank account. We're also, as people do, we have a bunch of other tabs open in our browser. We're doing other things, and we end up at a malicious website that sends a request, like it loads up a picture that sends a request to our bank website and says, send $5 million, I wish I had that much money to give away, to George's account, and gives it George's account number. So my bank sees that GET request. I'm logged in. My browser has a valid session, so it accepts that to be an active connection from me since I'm logged in my browser, and it will act on that, because it actually did, as far as the server can tell, come from me. When I didn't actually make that request myself, just another malicious website did, attacking, again in this case, the server accepting my browser. So cross-site scripting is the browser accepting the server. Cross-site request forgery is the server accepting my browser. So again, there's not an example of this in this particular site. It's a little bit more in-depth to set up something like that. But there are examples of dummy websites for testing that do have those, so you'll certainly run into them as you continue. But I just gave you a few examples here to get the basics down. Again, I'm sure that there is a web application testing class that goes much deeper into all of these. As pen testers, you may spend a lot of time with web applications. Some people, that's all they do is work with web applications. Some people just do, the basics of web testing. Run their web application scanners, pull up burp, and check for, our OWASP top 10, our main vulnerabilities. And some people may go so deep as to do code review on websites and go really deep in the website. So it really just depends, on the things you enjoy doing and the kind of work that you have coming in. There's so much different security work that you can kind of pick the areas that you like. So again, this is kind of a basic overview of some of our web app testing. If you're interested in learning more about it, certainly pick up a class or book on the subject. There is certainly a lot of work in this area, as with many of the others that we've touched.